Hi there, this is Jenny from TheSewingPalace in Helena, Montana. Today I'm going to show you how to do Fusible Web Appliqué. Fusible Web Appliqué is when you actually take one piece of fabric and attach it to another. Fusible Web is the glue that bonds those two pieces of fabric together. You're basically making a sticker and applying it to your background fabric. You can do all kinds of shapes, letters, whatever you want, and create wonderful projects. I'm going to get started by showing you a couple of tools, gadgets, and things that are very helpful to get you going for Fusible Web Appliqué. So a great example of applique is the center of this quilt, the Santa, the presents, and the tree. The background fabric is this cute little cream fabric, and then the pieces of fabric that are applied on the top are Fusible Web Appliqué. This is part of our online quilt along. We've called it Saturday Sampler, and it's a quilt that we started in 2019 and are just finishing up. If you want to learn how to make these blocks that go around it, you can watch our previous videos and look for Saturday Sampler. Tools to get started for Fusible Web Appliqué. You'll need your pattern, which we're using Santa's Village from Thimblecreek Quilts. You'll also need some fabrics that will be your background or whatever you're going to cut your applique shapes. So for the Santa body, you might want a couple of reds and whatever colors you would like to collect. Those pieces of fabric need to be as large enough to cover the shape. So for instance, on this shape, the tree, I would need a green tree that is that long, or if I wanted to break off the trunk, I could use green for the tree and brown for the trunk, and the fabric needs to cover that space. Once you've collected your fabric, you'll also need some Fusible Web product, which is the glue. There are a couple of choices. My favorite to choose from is Steam-a-Seam. It comes in a couple of versions. The one that I would suggest is Lite Steam-a-Seam 2. You can get it in pre-done packages that are sheets, I believe they're 9 by 12, and there's 5 sheets in here. For dry climates, this is a nice way to store your Fusible Web because it seals back up and it stays a little less dry in a dry climate. If your applique shapes are larger than these sheets, you can buy it by the yard. So it comes in different widths, and this is Lite Steam-a-Seam 2 that you can purchase by the yard. So once you've got your Steam-a-Seam and your fabric, there's a few other things that are really helpful to start collecting. You'll want a pressing surface, so I use the woolly pressing mat or an ironing board. You'll also want an iron that has cotton setting, because you'll be probably using cotton fabric. And then you'll want an applique pressing sheet. The favorite one that I have is called Fusamat. So the cool thing about this mat is it's like a Teflon coated mat, and you can see through it. It can withstand high surfaces of heat, and you can trace or see through it. So what is cool about that is this is the large sheet of Fusamat, and I can build pieces of my applique while I'm ironing on this, let them cool, and then take the whole piece off and then apply it to my project. So that's how this is used. Again, it comes in a couple different sizes. The other nice thing about this is going to protect your ironing board or ironing surface from getting any residual glue on it. So that is a good thing, and it wipes off and it comes off if you have any glue left. So there's a large one. Underneath I have a small one. Then, if you do get a little glue on your iron, I would have something at the ready to clean your iron. So it comes in sheets. There's iron sheets, and you just pull a sheet out and rub your iron on there if you get glue. You can also use this Clover product. It's a pen, so you remove it. It's kind of like lipstick, and you rub the pen. And then my favorite is this Faultless Iron Cleaner. And you actually apply this cleaner to an old terry cloth washcloth, and I clean your iron while it's hot by squirting this onto the washcloth, and then you rub your iron on it. So you might need an iron cleaner just in case. It's good to have that at the ready. Then your next couple of choices are to stabilize your stitches, because you're going to be sewing around the area. So to stabilize your stitches, you're going to apply some stabilizer to the back of your fabric. That stabilizer can either stay in at the end if it's very soft, or it can tear away. So there's a few tear away stabilizers, and depending on the stitch that you're using, you might need a little heavier stabilizer so your fabric doesn't pucker. I'm going to show you a couple examples of that. Then last but not least, you need thread and needles. So thread is not all equal. It does come in different weights, and I've chosen a few different weights of black thread, and I will spool some off and give you a close-up of these threads, and then you'll need a needle that will accommodate those. We've got a couple threads to choose from for this project, and all these examples are a black variety, and these threads all vary by different weights. So believe it or not, the higher the number on the thread, the skinnier it is. So this one is a 40 weight thread. The next one is a 30 weight thread. And then the next one I believe is a 30 weight thread as well, just different company. And then I worked my way up to a 12 weight thread. So depending on how you want your stitches to look, or if you want them to stand out quite a bit, you might want a thicker thread. When you're using a thick thread like that, you do need to accommodate by using a needle that has a very big eye. So the needle that I have chosen is a top stitch needle. And the eye on the needle is very, very large, and it will accommodate threads that go through that eye and not add additional friction. When I'm working with different weight threads in the top, I will generally just keep a moderate thread in the bobbin. So my bobbin I've already wound, and that's wound with a 40 weight thread for the bottom. The first shape that I'm going to work on is this present that's at the bottom of Santa's body. I'm going to pick some fabrics that will make up the present. So the present is going to be this dark navy. So I have enough to cover the shape of that. Then my ribbon and bow are both going to be out of this. I could choose to do the bow out of a different color and the ribbon that goes around the present an additional color. Once I've selected my fabrics, I will then take a piece of Lite Steam-a-Seam and I will trace those objects out as separate pieces. Lite Steam-a-Seam 2 has paper on both sides, and in between the paper is a light layer of glue. So if you separate one layer of paper, which you can see it's a little tricky to get it started because it's kind of sticking, if you separate, you'll kind of feel a sticky surface. This side has the glue and this side is just paper. So I'm going to trace my object onto the paper. There's my present. Then I will trace my ribbon and bow. On this pattern, it does have separate pieces that will be the little ties that dangle underneath. So those will be layered. So I'm going to make sure I trace those separately. I can tell that when there's a dotted line on the pattern, there'll be some overlap where that's happening. So if I pull my pattern away, you'll see I have one piece that will be the main present color, and then I actually have 1, 2, 3, and 4 pieces that are the bow color. Once you have your objects traced, you will then cut around them loosely. So leave a little bit all the way around, and this does not have to be perfect, but you don't want it right on the line. You just want to give yourself a little bit of room. So here's an example of the present. Then when you're done, you'll separate the extra layer of paper, and right here is the glue. That will stick to the wrong side of my fabric for the present. Remember, the wrong side of the fabric. So you'll stick it down, and with Steam-a-Seam, your hand is enough to bond it, but you can warm up an iron and gently press that and let it cool. You'll then cut it out on the line. I've cut my bow pieces out already, but I did want to give you a tip with large applique shapes. When there is a large surface of glue, it can get a little bit stiff. So I want to give you my trick to this. You would actually cut around and take the insides out of the applique. So for my present, you want about 3/8 of an inch of glue. And so I'll just trim out just the kind of internal part of this present. And then when I go to lay it back down on the wrong side of my fabric, what I have left is just a rim or an edge on my present. And so I will then cut out on this line, and this will be a little softer on the inside. I have all my shapes from my present cut out, and I'm going to sandwich my pattern in between my ironing board. So I have my woolly pressing mat and my applique pressing sheet. You can see I can still see my pattern through the applique pressing sheet, and I will start to build my pattern, creating the layers. So I'll gently pull off the piece of paper, and what should be revealed is the thin layer of glue on the back side, so you can see that. You'll continue to pull the paper off very gently. If it starts to separate from your fabric, you can add a little heat with the iron, but it will be slightly sticky. And then when you've got it all off, you're then going to build by applying each shape. So you'll pull the paper off, put on your bow, and build your present like so. The cool thing about Steam-a-Seam, it is lightly tacky, so you can readjust and stick it on until you're ready to finish your applique shape. So if you're not right on the line, or if you cut something a little differently, you can position it so that it will work for your cut. Once you've got all your pieces, then what you'll do is apply heat to this so that the glue will adhere to itself. You want to apply enough heat that it adheres, and then let it cool. Once you've ironed it and let it cool, all these shapes will then be stuck together as one solid sticker. So I can gently pull my present off, and then that behaves as one piece. So now I don't have to keep track of all those little pieces. You'll see that you might need bigger applique sheets for different shapes. The Santa is actually taped together to make the whole height of the body. So getting a bigger applique sheet is very helpful for this project. Once you have all of your shapes, you'll then start applying them onto your background fabric. So here you can see I have a present ready for that stage right there. So you'll build your applique, and then we'll be on to stitching. So here is one that's all ready to start stitching. Let's talk a little bit about the stitches you can use. You basically want stitches that go on each side of the applique. A very common stitch to use is a blanket stitch. So that one looks like that. On a Bernina, you can adjust that to a pleasing look. Berninas also have this stitch in a double option or a single option. So I'm going to stitch a couple of those out for you so that you can decide what you'd like to do for applique. There's also ladder stitches. This is an example of a ladder stitch. Feather stitches, decorative stitches, whatever you'd like to do. So choose the stitch that you'd like to do for your applique. Here are a couple of examples of blanket stitches. I'm using a 40 weight thread, and it's a cotton thread, in the top and the bottom. I'm also using a top stitch needle. This is a single blanket stitch with a slender width of about 2.0 by 2.0 in length. Here's a wider blanket stitch that is about 4 by 4. Then this option is a double blanket stitch that's about 5 by 5. And here's a double blanket stitch that's at about 3 by 3. So you just need to decide what type of stitch you'd like to have, and the smaller the applique, the smaller the stitch you'll need, because it can be a little overbearing. So choose your stitch. Don't forget to apply stabilizer to the back prior to sewing. That stabilizer will tear off, or if it's real light, it will actually stay in place. I'll show you a couple pictures of the finished quilt. Getting ready to sew around my first present on my project. I've chosen a 40 weight thread in the top and the bottom, and a top stitch needle. I've also chosen to use an applique pressing foot, which is foot number 20. I'm going to start by sewing in this upper corner of the bow, and I'm going to sew around the present to the other side. To start this stitch right here, I'm going to pivot my fabric, so I'm doing a straight stitch right along the edge. To get started with my applique, I'm going to start in this upper corner of the present. I'll drop my needle so it's right on the edge of the fabric between the Santa and the present. And I've adjusted my straight stitch to be very short and to form over on the right hand side. The beauty of a Bernina is you can actually pivot this so that, not pivot, but move the stitch over so that it will form using the edge of the foot. So you can use that stitch as your guide. So I'm going to sew along and do a couple of short straight stitches. Then I'm going to switch to my blanket stitch. The blanket stitch that I've chosen, I have also moved over to the right. Then I'm going to start sewing. When I come to a corner, I can either pivot at the correct point or I can use the straight stitch in order to travel along the edge so that I get to the right point. So I could take a couple little stitches so that I get to this correct point. Then I will pivot my fabric and switch to either the blanket stitch or I can sew to start traveling so that my stitch doesn't overlap the last one, which I just did a couple of stitches on that one. I'll switch to my blanket stitch and keep sewing. When I've went around the whole project, I will then finish off by tying off with a very short straight stitch and locking my stitches into place so that I have a nice secure stitch. I can then cut my threads and move to the next position on my applique. You'll sew around all the edges of your applique, creating whatever dimension and shape you'd like. On this example, she changed different colors. So around the Santa, she did red. Around his beard, she did white. The tree, she did green. You could stick to one color for the whole project. It's really up to you on how you want to personalize it. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about Fusible Web Applique. This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. We have lots of great videos on our YouTube channel, so check them out. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.